I was hoping actually that the question would be much more... Oh, a bird. Hello. I didn't see the bird. Anyway, I was hoping that the question would be much more complicated in a way, at least something about love or something like that. But how do economics affect politics today, and what consequence does this have for the future of democracy? So, I don't know, let's start from the place where we are. This is Athens, Greece. First of all, I knew Alexis Tsipras and Varoufakis and some people from Syriza even before they came to government. So in this sense, it was really a special moment to see how a country of more than 10 million people, in which direction it is going with a radical left government. And at the beginning, when I arrived to Athens, there was uncertainty, fear, no one knew what would happen. Neither the leadership of Syriza knew what would happen. They expected that at the referendum against austerity measures, the people will vote yes, but they voted no, 61%. Then there was a huge celebration. The next day in the morning, the Minister of Finance resigns. And then today, it is just a day after the new agreement was voted for in Parliament. Economy and democracy cannot go together, at least not neoliberal economy and true democracy. Usually democracy is just a word which is being used for the purposes of economy mainly. And you probably remember what happened in Greece these days. I think is very similar to the thing what happened in Chile at the beginning of the 70s. If you remember, Richard Nixon called Henry Kissinger and the director of CIA, and they had two opportunities. They had two options for Chile, because Salvador Allende was the first elected Marxist president in any country of Latin America. And Nixon said, okay, we have two options. One option is the soft option, and the other one is the hard option. The hard option was a military coup d'etat, and the soft option was best explained by Nixon himself, who said, let the economy scream. What we have seen in Greece in the last 2 weeks, even before the referendum, and especially after Syriza came to power in late January 2015, is that the financial powers who govern our economy today did everything in order to put the economy on the knees and to let the Greek economy to scream. And in a way, if we speak about the relation of economy and democracy, it's in a way the same as this bird in the cage behind me. The bird can do anything she or he wants, but she cannot leave the cage. And maybe she or him perceives this cage as freedom, although I have serious doubts it perceives this cage as freedom.
Over the last years, economy has appeared to be our only concern. We had almost forgotten that politics is the last instance of what matters, of what directs people here or there. There is a breach in politics today, and especially in Greece. During these negotiations, the real question was not about this or that austerity plan, this or that measure at the economic level. The real question of this last few days or last few months has been, is democracy allowed in a country like this? Can the Greek people have their say on what's affecting their future? From this point of view, Greece is now the place where the game, if the expression can be allowed, where the two partners, so to speak, the two enemies, whatever you like, is democracy on the one hand, and these faceless institutions on the other. And I'm talking about faceless institutions because nobody knows right now what form of, let's say, power is governing Europe. This is a big issue of democracy because all these institutions, most of the institutions rather, are not democratically elected, they are not controlled by the democratic force of the people of Europe, and they have the power, the political power of bringing economy to the forefront, and especially in making economy the only issue, supposedly, that matters. These are the moments when, in a sense, the fate of Europe is being replayed. The question where Europe is going to is the question which we are currently facing, and by we mean we, the peoples of Europe and peoples of the world. We don't know what the future will bring even tomorrow. These are very dense political times. But from the point of view of somebody who has some responsibility what is happening today in Greece, the only thing I can say is that we try to keep calm and carry on and face each issue, each novel issue, its new mind-boggling issue as it comes to the best of our abilities.
It would be nice to have a scotch or something here, considering the surroundings. All right, let's see what we got here. Yes. How do economics affect politics today? One question. What consequence does this have for the future of democracy? Second question. One question that could antecede this, I guess, would be whether economics always affected politics, if they always affected politics, what would the effect be? We can't imagine that it would always be the same. It's interesting, and I have to say this because I am a Greek, that the words economics and politics are Greek words, and they deserve a bit of reflection. Economics, economia, the Greek word, ancient word, means literally the rules of the house, or keeping one's house in order, as it were, or something like that. If that has a political component, it would be, as you can imagine, a kind of administrative one. This is really, you know, keeping your house in order, some sort of process by which you classify, organize, orchestrate, administer a certain order. So that kind of politics is certainly not the kind of politics that the word in Greek, ancient Greek, meant, politiki, which was one way of translating it literally was dealing with the things of the city. The word polis is city, dealing with the words of the city, the things of the city, or public things, you know, dealing with problems that we have in common, that are public, that are outside the house, that exceed one's own private world or private property, if you want. You know, so in a sense, I guess you can say that democratic politics does not, cannot be reduced to an economics. It's always beyond, in many ways, it's actually, to put it from another standpoint, democratic politics is beyond calculation. It's the politics of the incalculable in a real concrete sense, I would say, because it's unpredictable, because it is the politics of conflict, because it is a politics that is not based on any kind of principles that are exempt from being questioned. Everything in democracy is always being questioned, and it must. Democracy is really if there is something about democracy that separates it from any other mode of politics, is that it is the only politics where everyone shares power equally. At least this is the presupposition, and this is the desire, and this is what is supposed to be achieved in action.
Είναι λίγο περίεργο όλο αυτό, να πρέπει να μιλήσω για την λιτότητα, το χρέος και την ανθρωπιστική κρίση σε ένα μεσοαστικό διαμέρισμα σε μια μάλλον ακριβή περιοχή της Αθήνας. Σε κάνει να σκέφτεσαι πώς το προνόμιο προσδιορίζει τον τρόπο με τον οποίο μιλάμε και σκεφτόμαστε, ακόμα και τον τρόπο με τον οποίο μιλάμε και σκεφτόμαστε κριτικά. Τώρα, η ερώτηση για το κατά πόσο η οικονομία επηρεάζει την πολιτική σήμερα είναι πραγματικά πολύ κέρια, πιστεύω, γιατί αυτό που ζούμε σήμερα στο πλαίσιο του νεοφιλελευθερισμού είναι ακριβώς ότι το πρωτείο ενός λόγου και μιας πολιτικής δημοσιονομικής, οικονομικής, χρηματιστηριακής, λειτουργεί επισκιάζοντας εντελώς και υπονομεύοντας την πολιτική. Αν θεωρήσουμε ότι στην καρδιά της πολιτικής βρίσκεται η έννοια της πόλης, η έννοια αυτού η πόλη όχι μόνο ως χώρος, ως δημόσιος χώρος, αλλά ακόμα και ως συλλογικό υποκείμενο. Και βέβαια το κατεξοχήν πολιτικό ερώτημα εδώ είναι το ερώτημα του ποιος πια ανήκει στην πόλη, υπό ποιους όρους καλείται να ανήκει στην πόλη, με τι κόστος συμμετέχει στα της πόλης, στα κοινά. Γιατί ακριβώς αυτό που ζούμε είναι ένας τρόπος, μια κοινωνική μηχανική που εξαιρεί ανθρώπους, ομάδες, πληθυσμούς, τους εξαιρεί από τα δικαιώματα, τους εξαιρεί από τη δυνατότητα της επιβίωσης. Και αυτό που είναι πραγματικά για μένα πρόβλημα είναι ότι ο τρόπος με τον οποίο λειτουργεί ο νεοφιλελευθερισμός και η νεοφιλελεύθερη οικονομία δεν αφορά μόνο ένα επίπεδο μακροοικονομικό, αλλά αφορά πάρα πολύ την ίδια το επίπεδο της ύπαρξης των ανθρώπων, των ίδιων, των υποκειμένων, σε όλες τους τις διαστάσεις. Η ιδεολογία του χρέους είναι ακριβώς μία κοινωνική μηχανική που παράγει χρεωμένα υποκείμενα δηλαδή που είναι πάντοτε υπόχρεα και άρα που δεν έχουν κανένα περιθώριο αυτοπροσδιορισμού.
Oh, did you see this pigeon behind us?
Oh, wow. Hey. Been watching a lot of birds at home. I've been really into feeding
Maybe
the
we should let
birds.
him out. Her, him. That's probably not a good idea in the house, but... It's tempting.
I've watched so many birds the last 2 weeks. Like, I've spent hours and hours watching birds.
Oh yeah? Which kinds?
Cardinals, wrens, strange birds. I don't know the names. Mourning doves. Okay, should I redo the question?
Okay.
All right, friend. How do economics affect politics today, and what consequence does this have for the future of democracy? It's fucking democracy.
Right. So, I mean, how do economics affect politics today? I love the conversation right now that somehow finance and economics shouldn't be politicized. I mean, that is that's a current conversation, which
Yeah.
we are actively working on politicizing financial conditions for individuals so that they can actually see it and reformulate them as an actor within that space, right? Like if it's just a condition that's happening to you, then there's no space for you to have any agency.
Right. Well, economics has always been guised in this like pseudoscience, objectivity. It's the technocracy, just leave it to the experts. We're inventing all of these financial instruments you will never understand. Just let us do our thing and tweak this and that and stay out of it.
Yeah, I mean, until you realize that, like, oh yeah, we're creating all these instruments and they're a weapon.
Yeah.
They're a weapon against states, or they're a weapon against municipalities, or they're a weapon against individuals.
Right, they're a weapon of extraction. One thing I've been thinking about, like, in this conversation about economics and democracy too, is there was a kind of false economic democracy through the 80s and 90s, and probably its roots go further back, but, you know, that the consumer republic, right? That basically Americans, and this was sort of the Cold War, you know, the USSR was over here, and yeah, the United States was this consumer's paradise, and that you participated in democracy by buying things. And, you know, everything has a price, but that's how you cast your vote, right? $1, 1 vote. You buy a product, you buy a service, you buy an education. So there's this kind of false market democracy. And we kind of have to separate that out from so what are we talking about when we talk about economic democracy, right? A real vibrant, robust, inclusive economic democracy where citizens aren't denied power or voice because they lack economic power. But it is, I mean, I think we do first have to deconstruct that sort of false market vision that we've been sold for decades. And then we have to ask what the sort of real economic democratic system would be.
So, it's a very big question. I think it's a very acute one in the present context in which we find ourselves. Because in a way, politics appears to be completely dominated by economics. And everything that we do has to do, in one way or another, with money. It's about repaying our debts. It's about retaining, restoring growth rates or falling growth rates if we're here in Greece. It's about, getting food on the table in order to feed our families. It's about getting a job. And for ordinary people, everyday politics is just a matter of trying to survive, but also at the level of institutional politics, I would say. Economics is the decisive factor, and there's a very good reason for that. But what I think has happened in the last 30 or 40 years is that the democratic system as it used to exist, which was a limited democratic system, but nevertheless one that responded to some extent to popular desires and concerns, has entered into a major crisis. There was always a tension between democracy and capitalism, but there was a time after the Second World War when there was at least a minimum responsiveness on the part of politicians towards popular concerns. Elections actually made some kind of difference. What we have today is a complete opposite, is we have politicians actually answering to concerns of financial markets, most importantly, in order to be able to reproduce themselves. I mean, it's like politics cannot survive without money going through it, because the state needs money in order to pay its basic functionaries. So this whole process is kind of like we're stuck in some kind of trap, and that's why I think the birdcage allegory is a pretty good one. We're stuck in a kind of trap where politics and economics have merged into one, where the private and the public have merged into one, where the market and the state, or capital and the state, have merged into one. And it's increasingly impossible to disentangle the two. Democracy as we used to know it, in the sense of capitalist democracy, or democratic capitalism, is nearing its end. And Greece is like the canary in the coal mine, It's like the little birds you take in a cage into the mine to sense the imminent danger of gas filling up into the whole mine, at some point the whole thing might just explode. So what we're seeing is that the Greek political system has to be insulated from the pressures of its own people. So even a left government is not allowed to pursue left policies or do progressive things for its own people or demand a more humane treatment of its own people. Because fundamentally, the debt needs to be repaid. And that's the overarching importance for all of Europe, is that the debt is repaid. But the debt does not have to be repaid for the money itself, because they don't care about the money. They actually care about the power that this gives them. And the fact that as long as they can control Greece, they can control anyone else who rebels. Anyone else who tries to break out of the birdcage and decide their own future.
I object to the word austerity for a start, because until these last few years, austerity was something that a person took upon themselves. It was leading a disciplined life. It was living with minimal possessions. It was clean living. And that's not at all what's the thing that's called austerity today is. It's about expropriation. It's about people who are rich, that have everything they could possibly need or want, fabulous wealth, such as, monarchs in centuries past never had, imposing on other people a standard of living that's less than what's necessary. I think what it's about is a radical experiment to see how far expropriation can go. This has been done by the global system in the third world, in the second world, what used to be called the socialist bloc, and now in the first world. And Greece is at the cutting edge of this, to see how much expropriation is possible in a first world country, to see how far accumulation by dispossession can go. I mean, look at the rate of youth unemployment here in Greece. I mean, this stage of early adulthood, of course, any stage of life is important. But there's a stage where, you come from being a child and being taken care of to finding your own way in the world, and to be denied the possibility to find your way in the world. Because, employment is a very basic thing. I wouldn't even be for a welfare system that just gave them money, because I think that labor is essential to liberation. I think that a person has to feel that they're contributing to what's of value in the world in return for what they take from the world. I think that there's no dignity without work. And for people to be denied that is really quite violent and brutal. But the problem was and is, that the 99% don't know how to operationalize their power. Because whatever the exact number is, there's so many more of us than there are of them. It's our labor, by hand or by brain, that makes the world go round. I mean, there is nothing of any value in the world that doesn't come from the resources of the earth and human labor. And why should 1% have so much power and wealth when they contribute little or nothing? It's possible for people to live on hedge funds and produce nothing of any value to the world. To be, and that, the wealth that's in this parasitic enclave is increasing. There's just more and more of the wealth of the world that's being expropriated from the people who have produced the wealth of the world, or, in the case of the young employed, the people who are ready to produce the wealth of the world. The injustice of it is so overwhelming. It's so hard to keep going. I've been at it for decades now. And I don't even do it anymore because I think I can win. I just do it because I can't leave it uncontested. I can't not do it. But it's so overwhelming at times. And this is a particularly bad moment because of what's happened here in Greece. I've been here often during the crisis. And it just feels as if the force that I've been part of has been crushed. And I'll fight it in every way. I have it in my power. And maybe it'll hardly make any difference. But what else can I do?
I'm a literary writer. I'm a writer, but I used to lecture on economic history and political economy when I lived in New York. And when I think of economics and politics, I think of two realms, two concepts that cannot be thought of separately, and which at the same time are in constant conflict with each other. What we are experiencing, not only here in Athens, not only here in Greece, we're experiencing the use of economics as something that can bludgeon us out of democracy, out of politics, away from different choices, away from how we can decide to lead our lives and proceed. There is a dimension, there's a degree of even fatalism, of determinism in economics, as if that's nature given, if not God given, if given from somewhere else that we simply follow. While politics always has a whiff of voluntarism to it, always has a whiff of something we can do, but we're not sure if the restraints and requirements and environment and context and conditions allow. If we only look at things and issues and developments that are extremely recent, why was the euro introduced? It was presented as economic conception. The euro was introduced because it would accelerate German unification, the most recent German reunification between the West Germany and East Germany, as long as it was linked to the end of the Deutsche Mark. So it was a purely political decision, which has to do with why other preconditions were not thought of in typical EU fashion and left for the future. That is something most people, most discussants and commentators forget.
In the short novel by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the colonel, no one writes to the colonel, el coronel no tiene quien le escriba. This is a very simple story about an exchange or the economical dire situation in which this this family of the colonel, his wife, and his deceased son, who was a rebel, sort of in a clandestine student organization, are caught. And at every moment of the story, the simple question of how they were going to make ends meet is coded in moral language. And so, borrowing against their wedding ring, for example, would be a sin in the eyes of the priest. And there's a long history of how church and state have moralized questions about economics. And I think this is what we're seeing again today. The very term of austerity politics uses a moralizing framework in order to talk about supposedly neutral economical issues of playing by the rules, paying off your debts, which seem very straightforward and, in a sense, not up for political discussion. Even if you think about Nietzsche's approach on the genealogy of morals, where he does something very similar, saying that questions about guilt, moral questions, are in fact derived from economic relations of indebtedness, which need to be historicized, and maybe Nietzsche is not the best person to turn to in terms of the concrete elaboration of such a history of the moralization or the politicization of economics. But he tries to bring back moral questions to questions of guilt and resentment. And we can ask the opposite question, which is how economic questions have been treated in moral or ideological language, all the way from usury for the scholastics or the church fathers to this question about laziness or frugality or austerity or abstention from the pure expenditure. Right? And in a sense, that idea of breaking with the strict neutrality and calculability of economics holds, I think, still some kind of a utopian promise of a different kind of economy, an economy that would be built on generosity or on the sharing of gifts. And I think that's sort of a yearning for not a pure or entirely egalitarian exchange, because I don't think that's at issue either. There's always a question about prestige and the exchange of power relations that we should never ignore. But the possibility that there is an experience that would escape at least the narrow framework in which economics are being used as a tool, the neutrality of which is precisely what makes it political.
So the question is, how do economics affect politics today, and what consequence does this have for the future of democracy? God, I think that's the wrong question. I don't think democracy opens up a horizon anymore of emancipatory egalitarian possibility. And that's because democracy has become totally intertwined with capitalism. I call that communicative capitalism. Communicative capitalism is when the values of democracy, values like participation, free expression, everyone's opinion counting, inclusion, it's when these values, communicative capitalism, is when these democratic values are actually the material form through which capital is accumulated in the interest of capital as a class. The democratic goal is more people need to express themselves, and it doesn't even matter what they say. Each opinion is the equivalent of any other. So it can be a fascist opinion, it can be a right-wing opinion, it can be a racist opinion, and it's just another opinion that counts. And that's the mistake. Opinions aren't all equal, and they're not all worth the same. Some are wrong, morally, politically, rationally. capitalism today doesn't even need a commodity form. It can take our lives directly. Again, it does this, the easiest way we see this happening is with social media, where our basic pictures aren't just shared with friends, like, oh, here, I took your picture, but instead uploaded so that they're in databases, that it can then be searched and monetized and scanned and turned into big data. Big data is the primary resource of the communicative economy. And it's one of the ways that, with the facile rhetoric of information wants to be free, it's a way that more and more of our work becomes not paid, becomes co-opted, and becomes basically another source for the surplus value that the rich use to enrich themselves, and that they take from us and leave us with less and less and less. It's not like we work for pay anymore. It's like whatever is pay is just whether or not the benefactor decided to give it to us. So we're supposed to feel grateful, like, oh, thank you, judge, for judging me to be deserving, or judging me to have won, or judging me to not be a loser. And mainstream media talks about that as the 80-20 rule, or the winner-take-all society. Most people are losers, one or two are winners. Google seizes the social substance. It takes our basic relationships, right? The links that we make, the associations that we make. It takes our free associations, for crying out loud, and monetizes them. It says, oh, here's a set of associations. You might not know that someone who links on these 3 things is actually more likely to link on those, but hey, advertiser, I will sell you this information. And we, the producers of it, we're just raw material. Products. Not even products. Worse than products. The resource. We're the resource. And as we see with climate change, capitalism doesn't take care of its resources.
In a way, Greece is inside this cage. And with the referendum, with the 61% people who voted Ohi, no, at the referendum in Greece, it was for the first time that the Greek people in recent history opened up the cage, and for the first time they were conscious there is a world outside of austerity measures and of the Thatcherist slogan, there is no alternative. Yes, of course, you could say, but the world outside is a world of drachma, it's a world full of uncertainty, without any scenario what could happen. But philosophically speaking, this is precisely the definition of freedom. If we go back even to existentialism and Jean-Paul Sartre, the definition of freedom is that it provokes anxiety, that when you open up the cage, and maybe as this bird here, you don't even know to fly, how to fly, and you open up the cage, but you don't know what will happen. And Greece was at that moment, but the financial powers who run our economy today tried to do everything in order to prevent the bird getting out of the cage. I think we should learn from our defeats, because defeats are part of life, and defeats maybe can make us open the cage.
you.